The Portrait Years by Atef Abu Saif. He used to spend the morning looking at the little picture hanging on the wall of the room. This morning, the west wind had moved it slightly so that it hung wonkily. He brought a chair over to the wall to stand on and straightened it up. Time had a sharp axe. It hacked deeper into his defences each time he tried to hold back from crying, each time he thought of the 15 years that had passed since he last saw him. In the picture, his son was an adolescent. His glossy hair, the patchy first beginnings of a beard, the smile on his lips, all reminded Darwish of the day the soldiers had come to arrest him. Amna had grabbed her son and held on to him, shouting at the soldiers. Darwish, however, had just rubbed her shoulders and allowed himself to be reassured somewhat by the smile on his son's lips, even as he left the house surrounded by soldiers. Darwish said to Amna, "It's not his destiny to be locked up. They'll let him out. You'll see." Amna's dying wish was to hold her son in her arms once again. She used to spend all her time preparing for her monthly visits, thinking about the stories she'd be able to tell him and all the news of family and friends. Then she'd remind herself that she mustn't forget to pass on a greeting to him from Soha, the neighbour's daughter. That would cheer him up, might even make him blush a little bit. "A mother knows," as she used to say. Amna died without her wish of holding her son in her arms ever being granted. As for Darwish, he hadn't ever visited their son in prison at all. The Israeli authorities had forbidden him from going. One day he said to a foreign Red Cross worker, "But he's my son. I want to see him." The man answered sympathetically in pidgin Arabic, "I know, but it's out of my hands." The day Amna died, the female mourners bewailed her misfortune because she had never again been able to embrace her firstborn child. All their stories at the funeral and at the wake were about her and her son. As the women left the house, they tried to console Darwish with the thought that Amna would see her son in heaven. Darwish shook his head, asking himself what use that was if she hadn't seen him alive. The mourners were all leaving now, and he fought back his tears so that they wouldn't notice him crying as they left him alone with his daughter Layla and his little son Salim, who was barely a year old. Now, 15 years had passed, and Amna had passed on to another world, and he was alone in the house with Layla and Salim. Every Monday morning at 10 o'clock, he joined the prisoners' families sit-in in front of the Red Cross headquarters. The first thing he did every Monday was move a chair over to the wall, stand on it, and tenderly, with painstaking care, take the picture down off its hook. He would wrap it in a paper bag and set out for the weekly sit-in. When he got to the Red Cross building, he would take his place among the others and sit on the pavement, holding the picture up in the air. When the peace agreement was reached, he heard on the news that all prisoners were going to be released. He went straight out to take part in the massive demonstrations which were roaming through the streets of the camp and the rest of Gaza City, proclaiming the start of a new era. 5 years passed. The peace accords still hadn't brought his son home. He remembered how he'd gone out to the square where the Legislative Council building was with Amna, waving flags, celebrating the peace which was going to make her dream come true. On the way home, she described to him the promised, cherished moment when she would take the boy, as she called him, in her arms and hug him at last. She described, too, what she would cook for him and what she'd buy for him. Amna finished her account, as she always did, with, "Let's get him married. Then he can have kids and we can play with them." She died without the peace accords having kept their promise. When the Intifada broke out, Darwish joined the angry crowds, protesting the occupation and its massacres. His face was full of rage, his hand held up towards the sky like all the rest of the throngs of people that poured out into the streets. He actually believed that his son would be set free by force when he heard the eloquent Imam's stirring words, "Nothing can keep him locked up now except our own lack of willpower." 8 years had passed since that moment, and the hand was still up there in the sky, pointing feebly at a dream that never came true. The picture hanging on the wall was like a clock that ticked every time he raised his eyes to it. The monotony of its ticking bore into his composure with such a force, it was as if his wounds were being ripped open, stirring up the very deepest pain. From the picture on the other wall, Amna's face looked sorrowfully down at him, sad to have left him on his own.